My husband divorced me to marry a perfect woman. Then I met her, and everything unraveled. The sky had turned deep blue by the time I finished lighting the balcony candles. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing. The Wagyu ribs had marinated for hours, the wine was set in a crystal decanter, and the vanilla cake sat pristine in the fridge, its simple message written in silver icing, to Noah, happy anniversary. I adjusted my hair once more in the mirror, checking my reflection with quiet hope. It was our 9th wedding anniversary. A Thursday night, but I had taken the day off. I thought it would mean something to him. I thought I still meant something. At exactly 7 p.m., I sat at the table I'd arranged near the balcony rail, watching the streetlights flicker on below, waiting for my husband to walk through the door. By 8 o'clock, the candles had burned halfway down. I hadn't heard anything, no text, no call. My phone sat silent beside my plate, and I stared at it like it might suddenly ring if I looked long enough. By 8:30, I sent him a short message, waiting for you. I tried to keep it light. At 9 o'clock, the food had gone cold, and the wine no longer tasted like celebration. I reheated the ribs just to give myself something to do, but even the smell didn't cheer me up. When my phone finally buzzed at 10:35 p.m., it wasn't a call, it was an email. Noah wrote, "Big client emergency. Stuck at the office. We'll celebrate later." There was no apology. No "I love you." Just sterile text on a glowing screen. I stared at it until my hands began to tremble. I didn't cry that night. Not even a tear. But there was something colder than sadness sitting in my chest, something that didn't move, didn't allow breath to pass freely. I blew out the candles one by one, folded the napkin I had ironed hours earlier, and put the untouched cake back into the fridge. The meat went into storage containers, the plates back into the cabinet. It was as if the evening had never happened, like someone had erased it with one swipe of the hand. When I changed out of the dress I had chosen so carefully, it felt like removing a costume I had worn for a role I didn't land. The apartment was silent. Noah still wasn't home. The next morning, I woke early out of habit and went to work as usual, but my mind was a carousel of unfinished thoughts. I kept glancing at my phone, expecting a follow-up message or maybe a missed call. Nothing. At noon, the worry began to outweigh the disappointment, so I called his office. A receptionist answered. Her voice hesitated when I asked to speak to Noah. "Oh, he's no longer with us," she said, almost apologetically. "He resigned earlier this week." "Didn't he tell you?" My body went numb. "Resigned?" I asked. "Yes. 3 days ago," she confirmed. "Said he was relocating." I ended the call and stood in the hallway of my own office, unable to move. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and it felt like the world had tilted just slightly off axis. I drove home faster than I should have. Each turn felt like a question I couldn't answer. When I reached our apartment, I didn't take the elevator, I ran up the stairs, breathless, dizzy with dread. I pushed open the door, hoping it was all a mistake. But the moment I stepped inside, something was wrong. The hallway felt too empty, and the air was still in an unsettling way. I walked straight to the shoe rack, and my heart stopped. The space where Noah kept his brown leather boots, his favorite pair, was empty. I dropped my purse to the floor, hands shaking. "Noah?" I called out. No answer. I moved toward the bedroom, my footsteps slow, hesitant. The door was ajar. Inside, he stood near the bed, calm as ever, folding his shirts into a suitcase. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. "You're back early," he said flatly, like I had come home from a grocery trip. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice already cracking. "New job." "Albuquerque," he replied, tossing in a pair of dress pants. "I left you an email." My hands were cold. "You quit your job? Without telling me?" I asked, as if I hadn't already known the answer. "Yeah," he said. Then, without a hint of hesitation, he pulled a slim folder from the suitcase and placed it on the nightstand. It was labeled simply, "Divorce Papers." I stared at the folder, unsure if I was supposed to touch it or burn it. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's over," he said, as if canceling a subscription. "You're not the wife I need." My mouth opened but no words came. "You've changed. You're distracted, tired all the time. You barely cook. The place is messy." I could only laugh bitterly. "Because I have a job, Noah. I work long hours just like you. You eat out, come home late. You never asked if I was okay." His jaw tightened. "You're making excuses. A real wife doesn't need to be told what to do. I've supported you, cleaned up after you, planned our anniversaries alone," I said, my voice rising. "I asked for nothing, and still you're leaving." He zipped up his suitcase with a finality that made my stomach drop. "I'm done explaining," he said, brushing past me. I blocked the door, desperate for a flicker of remorse, but his eyes were steel. "No apology? No guilt?" I asked. He didn't respond. Just pulled the door open and left, his footsteps disappearing down the hallway. I stood there, frozen, the folder in my hands now. The lock clicked. The silence was total. For 2 days, I didn't speak to anyone. I went to work, answered emails, even smiled when necessary. But every time I came home, the emptiness screamed louder. His cologne was still in the bathroom. His coffee mug was by the sink. But his presence was gone. I didn't open the divorce papers. Not yet. I wasn't ready to see my name beside his, linked not by love, but by legal formality. On the 3rd day, the building office called. "Ms. Green," the manager said. "We received a lease transfer request from your husband. He says you'll vacate by the end of the month." It was like a bucket of ice down my spine. "He said what?" I asked. "That he no longer lives there. That the apartment is yours to clear out," she explained. No warning. No conversation. Just another cold departure masked as procedure. That night, I walked around the apartment collecting receipts, furniture, appliances, dishes. All of it purchased under my name. The irony struck hard. He left with a suitcase and self-righteous silence, but everything tangible was mine. That thought gave me the smallest measure of strength. Not because of what I owned, but because I was finally seeing clearly the man I had once called my husband. After that call, I sat on the couch for a long time, surrounded by walls that now felt foreign. The pictures we took on our honeymoon still hung above the mantel, mocking me. His signature was already on the lease termination form, as if he expected me to quietly vanish like an eraser mark. I wasn't just hurt, I was insulted. As if I were a guest in my own life. I gathered my things with stiff hands, moved methodically through the kitchen drawers, the linen closet, the bedroom. Everything reminded me of how long I had tried to build something permanent with someone who had planned an exit all along. By the end of the night, I had packed 4 boxes with his leftover items. The toothbrush, the ties I gifted him, even the mug that said "Best Husband" on the back, half joke, half hope. I put it all by the door. What surprised me most wasn't the grief. It was the anger. The raw, rising heat in my chest that told me I had given too much to a man who gave nothing back. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the ruins of someone else's indifference. That night, I didn't sleep, I planned. Over the weekend, I began a quiet war against the void. I scrubbed every inch of the apartment as if purging memories, like his betrayal lived in the grout and the corners of the drawers. I donated his clothes, boxed the photos, replaced the sheets. It was therapeutic in a strange, defiant way. I wasn't crying anymore. I was cleansing. And yet, even as I rid the apartment of his scent and shadow, My mind kept chasing the same question. Who was she? Noah hadn't just left me, he had leapt into someone else's arms. That much was clear now. The resignation from work, the overnight move, the cold detachment, it all pointed to a premeditated escape. But from what? From love? From boredom? Or had he simply rewritten our entire marriage in his mind to justify his actions? As I folded the last towel, I found an unfamiliar receipt tucked behind a drawer divider, $2, 300 at a resort spa in Santa Fe. The date? 2 weeks before our anniversary. I stared at it, heart pounding. He hadn't just moved on. He had been gone for far longer than I realized. On Monday morning, I finally signed the divorce papers. It took me 15 minutes. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold beside me, as I read line after line of cold legal terms that outlined the end of an entire chapter of my life. There were no disputes, no shared property battles. The form assumed it was mutual, peaceful. It wasn't. It was abandonment dressed as civility. I added my signature with the same precision I used at work, controlled, emotionless, but the pen shook slightly as I set it down. I mailed the envelope without ceremony. No last-minute reconsideration, no dramatics. I walked to the mailbox in flat shoes and a quiet heart. The sky was overcast, and for once I welcomed the gloom. It matched me. That evening, I poured myself a glass of the red wine I'd once bought for our anniversary and sat alone on the balcony. I didn't toast to the future or mourn the past. I simply stared into the horizon and let the silence stretch. Somewhere, he was living a new life. I had just buried the old one. The name appeared almost by accident. While organizing some of our old shared documents, I came across a reservation confirmation for a boutique hotel in Taos. The name attached wasn't mine, it was a woman named Savannah Hayes. I would have dismissed it as an error if it weren't listed under Noah's corporate travel account. My heart kicked against my ribs. The email had been forwarded to him. He had paid for the stay. She had checked in as Mrs. Green. My last name. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what shook me more, the fact that she existed or that she had already worn the identity that was still legally mine. I searched the name. A few clicks later, I found her on LinkedIn, Savannah Hayes, interior designer, formerly of Austin. Tall, brunette, eyes like amber glass. She looked like the kind of woman people notice in cafes. Perfect hair, symmetrical face. The kind of beauty that photographs well in engagement announcements. And she had tagged Noah in a photo 2 weeks ago. It was a dinner, white tablecloth, champagne flutes, the caption read, "To New Beginnings." I stared at her face for a long time, memorizing every angle. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. 2 weeks later, I attended a work event hosted at a high-end restaurant downtown. I didn't want to go. I was still raw, still healing, but I needed to show my face. I wore a simple black dress and tried to channel professionalism. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself from the table and walked toward the bar for some air. That's when I saw her, Savannah. Standing just a few feet away, laughing with a group of people. In person, she was even more polished, more perfect. But when our eyes met, her smile faltered. She walked toward me slowly, as if unsure whether I recognized her. "Hi," she said gently. "You must be Grace." I blinked. "You know who I am?" I asked. Her gaze softened. "Yes. I've seen photos. Noah talked about you." Her voice dropped, as if ashamed. "I didn't know it was like this. I thought you two had been separated for a long time." I tilted my head. "He told you that?" Savannah nodded. Then, reaching into her purse, she pulled out a small envelope. "There's something you should see," she said. "It changes everything." I hesitated before taking the envelope from Savannah's hand. The restaurant buzzed with noise around us, but the space between us was quiet, thick with something unspoken. Her hand trembled slightly. I looked at her face, trying to place what made her seem so oddly familiar, not just from the pictures, but from somewhere deeper. "Have we met before?" I asked, and she blinked rapidly, like she was trying to decide how much to reveal. "No," she said at first, then after a pause, added, "maybe, indirectly." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped aside, motioning for her to follow me into a quieter lounge area near the coat room. There, under softer light, I opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails, all dated before the divorce. Most were from Noah, flirtatious, calculated, and disturbingly romantic. But one, in particular, stood out. It was a forwarded message from him to a friend, bragging about how easy it had been to convince Savannah he was separated. He wrote, "She's still cooking dinner for me and hasn't even caught on. I could move in tomorrow and she'd still be waiting for our anniversary." My knees buckled. Savannah looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just in love." We parted ways that night in silence. She didn't offer comfort, and I didn't ask for it. The envelope burned in my purse as I walked home through the cold night air. I barely felt my feet on the pavement. When I got home, I poured a drink and reread every word in those printed emails. I had been lied to, used, and replaced, like an appliance that outlived its usefulness. Yet it wasn't the betrayal that hurt most. It was the ease with which he had done it. And then, just as I was folding the documents to put them away, something slipped from between the pages. It was a small, worn hospital bracelet. I picked it up and turned it over. The name read Savannah Hayes. The date was almost 10 years ago. The hospital listed was one I recognized. My mother had stayed there briefly during her chemo. I stared at the bracelet, confused. Why would Savannah's bracelet be tucked into these papers? What connection did she have to a place I'd only known during my most private pain? And then I remembered a volunteer. Years ago, there had been a young woman who delivered books to patients, who once sat beside my mother's bed and made her laugh. Could it have been her? Was Savannah that girl? I called Savannah the next morning. My voice was sharper than I intended. "Why did you include a hospital bracelet?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Because that's where I first saw you," she said. "I was a volunteer during college. I used to deliver books to your mother's room." My breath caught. "You were the one with the blue notebook," I said slowly, the memory coming back. "You read her poetry." Savannah let out a soft gasp. "I never forgot her. Or you. I admired the way you took care of her." She paused, then added, "That's why I wanted to tell you the truth." Her voice wavered as she spoke. "Noah didn't tell me your name until months into our relationship. And when I realized, it was like being hit by a truck. I confronted him, but he always had a new lie to patch the last one. He said you were cold, distant. That you had cheated. He made you sound like a villain." She drew in a breath, but I couldn't reconcile that image with the woman I remembered, who brought fresh tea to her mother's bedside, who smiled even when her eyes looked tired. I was silent. For the first time in months, I felt seen. Not as someone left behind, but as someone remembered for her quiet strength. Savannah agreed to meet again, this time at a quiet park bench near the museum. She brought a manila folder and a thermos of herbal tea. "I know you don't owe me anything," she began, "but I need you to see what happened after I confronted him." Inside the folder were copies of her own divorce papers, filed just 2 weeks after mine. "He proposed to me the day he left you," she said. But when I started asking questions, the mask fell. She described how quickly the charm turned into contempt. "He started calling me ungrateful. Said I should be lucky he chose me over you." Savannah's hands were steady now, her voice calm but firm. When I threatened to leave, he said no one else would want a woman with emotional issues. He thought I was weak. She turned to look at me. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Her words hit me in the gut. I had blamed her, envied her, even resented her. But in that moment, I saw her for who she was, another woman fooled by the same script. We were not enemies. We were survivors of the same storm, standing in different wreckage. Over the next few days, Savannah and I talked more than I ever thought possible. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was an alliance built on shared pain. She told me about his former girlfriends, about his pattern of emotional manipulation, financial secrecy, and carefully curated charm. He once told me he hated needy women, she said. But then made sure I needed him for everything. He controlled the finances, planned our schedule, even picked out my clothes. I listened, chilled to the bone. So much of it mirrored my own experience, things I had brushed off as quirks or stress. Then she showed me something that made my skin crawl, an old message board thread on a relationship forum, anonymous but disturbingly specific. A user describing a man who love-bombed, then ghosted. Who bragged about training women into dependency. Savannah had traced the IP address linked to the posts back to a device once registered to Noah's former firm. He documented us like trophies, she said. We were stories to him, not people. I sat with that for a long time. The man I had loved, defended, and built a life with had never truly seen me as human. He had just seen a role to fill and discard. Later that week, Savannah handed me a second envelope. This one, you'll want to see alone, she said quietly. I waited until I was home, sitting at the kitchen table that once hosted quiet dinners with Noah. Inside the envelope were printed screenshots of bank transfers, forwarded emails from Noah to a personal account I'd never seen before, and detailed notes about luxury purchases made in both our names. Jewelry, hotel suites, plane tickets. I recognized none of them. But my name, my credit profile, he had used them freely, like a tool in his double life. Tucked between the sheets was a photo I couldn't take my eyes off. It was of a condo, furnished, sleek, unfamiliar. The lease was signed by Noah, and me. Or rather, someone pretending to be me. I stared at the forged signature. It was nearly perfect. And beneath it all was a post-it note in Savannah's handwriting, "You've been erased in more ways than one. He tried to rewrite you." I pressed my hand to my mouth, the realization clawing at my chest. This wasn't just betrayal, it was identity theft wrapped in charm. In the weeks following our divorce, I hadn't bothered to investigate Noah's professional life. I had assumed he'd simply moved on to a new firm, perhaps chasing a better salary or a promotion. But Savannah, ever meticulous, dug deeper. He told me he'd been promoted twice last year, she said one afternoon, as we sifted through more of her compiled documents. But I contacted his old company, no one remembers any promotions. In fact, his performance review was abysmal. She handed me a printed email from HR. Noah Green was asked to resign due to inappropriate conduct. My hands clenched. Inappropriate how? I asked, already knowing the answer in my gut. Savannah nodded slowly. He'd been using the company card for personal expenses. Taking clients to dinner, except there were no clients. Just me. Just trips to Santa Fe and Napa Valley. I couldn't believe it. The man who lectured me on being frugal, who scolded me for upgrading our internet plan, had been siphoning money from his job to impress another woman. He said you were wasteful, Savannah whispered. But it was all projection. I shook my head. No. It was all deflection. One morning, Savannah and I met at a quiet coffee shop just off the main street. We sat in a corner booth, both of us wrapped in thick coats, though the chill in the air wasn't entirely from the weather. "Do you think he ever loved either of us?" I asked, stirring my coffee slowly. Savannah didn't answer right away. "He loved control," she said finally. He loved the feeling of being admired, being needed. But love? I don't think he knows what that is. Not the kind that lasts. She paused. He used me to escape the life he built with you. Then used someone else to escape me. I nodded, remembering the strange silence during the last months of our marriage. The way he avoided eye contact, the deflection when I asked simple questions. I thought I was boring him, I said. I thought I wasn't exciting enough, spontaneous enough. Savannah gave me a sad smile. I thought I was the solution. Turns out, I was just the next story. There was no bitterness in her voice, just the steady, heavy calm of someone who had stared into a fire long enough to understand its heat. Savannah had found something else, a downtown apartment Noah had rented under a different name, paid for by transfers from his business account. It's still under lease, she told me. Want to see it? I hesitated but agreed. When we arrived, the concierge didn't blink before giving us access. The door clicked open with ease. Inside, the apartment was pristine. Modern, sparse, impersonal. The furniture looked unused, the kitchen spotless. But the office, that was different. The desk drawers were filled with notebooks, printed statements, USB drives, and photographs, hundreds of them. We sat on the floor going through his life in boxes. Receipts from places I'd never been. Notes scribbled with initials neither of us recognized. Savannah found a framed photo of herself on a shelf, placed next to one of me. He kept us both here, she whispered. Like we were exhibits. I reached for the USB and plugged it into the apartment's laptop. Files upon files appeared, audio memos, scanned letters, even voice recordings of his meetings with us. He'd documented everything. Not out of nostalgia. Out of control. This wasn't love. This was obsession masked as ownership. 2 days after that discovery, Savannah called. There's someone else, she said simply. Another woman. Her name is Dana. I think she's the next one. My stomach turned. How do you know? She showed up at my building. She said she found my contact on his phone and needed answers. We arranged to meet in a public place, this time a quiet bookstore cafe. When Dana walked in, my heart twisted. She looked like I had 2 years ago, bright, open, a little uncertain, but hopeful. We introduced ourselves, and I could see her trying to mask her confusion with politeness. As we sat, Dana pulled out her phone and showed us messages, photos, voice notes. They were recent. He had already told her I was an ex who cheated. That Savannah had mental health issues. That he was trying to start fresh after surviving toxic women. Savannah let out a dry laugh. I couldn't speak. Dana's face crumpled. I thought I was helping him heal, she said. I didn't know I was part of a pattern. We were 3 strangers with the same wound. And that was the moment I realized, this man didn't just leave damage behind, he built it with purpose. The next morning, I made a decision I hadn't considered before. I called the Human Resources Department at Noah's former company. I gave my name, paused, and then said calmly, I'm a former spouse. I have reason to believe my ex-husband used company resources to finance a double life and committed document fraud involving my identity. The line went quiet. Then the voice asked me to hold. When they returned, the tone had shifted. You're not the first person to call about Mr. Green, the woman said quietly. There's an internal investigation already underway. Hearing that felt like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't the problem. Others had seen it too. I gave them what I had, copies of the forged documents, evidence of the false lease, the purchases made using my name. Thank you, she said. This helps us more than you know. When I hung up, my hands were cold. I looked out the window, watching people pass by unaware that, just 1 floor above, a quiet reckoning was beginning to take shape. Later that week, Savannah and I met again. I told her about the call to HR. Her eyebrows lifted, a small flicker of vindication in her expression. "So it's happening," she said. "He's being investigated." I nodded. We didn't celebrate. There was no high five, no triumphant toast. It was heavier than that. The kind of justice that arrives not with fireworks, but with quiet dignity. "Do you think he knows?" I asked. She thought for a moment. Men like him always assume they're 10 steps ahead. He won't see it coming until it's already over. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the soft hum of the cafe. Then Savannah looked at me and said, "I've been offered a speaking opportunity. A non-profit that helps women recovering from emotional abuse wants me to tell my story." My heart stirred. "You should do it," I said. "You've lived through the fire. You can help someone else walk through theirs." She smiled, not with pride, but with purpose. "Maybe that's the point of all this," she said. "Maybe it wasn't just pain. Maybe it was preparation." The call came on a Thursday morning. A woman from the bank. "Are you Grace Green?" she asked. "Yes." Her tone shifted instantly. "I'm calling in regard to a joint investment account opened under your name. We've placed a temporary freeze due to suspicious withdrawals." My breath caught. What kind of withdrawals? She rattled off a list: vacation packages, high-end electronics, designer clothing, all within the last month. All from the account I never knew existed. "I've never authorized any of this," I said, my voice shaking. "We suspected as much," the banker said. "Due to irregularities in the signature verification and a recent alert from our fraud department, we've escalated it to legal." I hung up and stared at my phone. Even after the divorce, even after leaving, Noah had tried to keep using me as a source. Not of love, but of access. But now the doors were closing, one by one. And this time, I wasn't the one locking them. I was the one walking away, head high, as the walls he built to trap others began to collapse on him instead. 2 weeks later, I received the official letter. A subpoena. Noah was being taken to civil court for financial fraud, identity misuse, and breach of fiduciary responsibility tied to his former employer. I was listed as a witness. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer. I didn't look like the same woman who had cried over cold Wagyu ribs months ago. I looked steady, present, alive. At the courthouse, I saw Savannah in the hallway. She gave me a nod, no fear, just clarity. When Noah entered the room, he looked different. Smaller. His suit no longer fit like armor. His eyes darted, scanning the crowd, but no one looked back with sympathy. When I took the stand, I spoke only the truth, no embellishment, no vengeance. Just facts. The receipts. The lies. The manipulation. I told the story I had once been too ashamed to admit. The judge listened closely. When Savannah spoke, she did the same. Our voices, once silenced, now echoed through the chamber, turning shame into evidence. Pain into power. Noah's defense tried to argue it was all misunderstanding. Miscommunication, his lawyer said. But documents don't miscommunicate. Forged signatures don't appear by accident. The judge reviewed the evidence with grim precision. After closing statements, there was a brief recess. When we returned, the verdict was swift. The court found Noah liable for multiple counts of fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful use of private information. There were fines, restitution, and an official record of what he had done. But the most powerful moment came afterward. Outside the courtroom, in the corridor echoing with quiet footsteps, Noah stopped me. For the first time in a year, he looked me in the eye. "You always liked being the victim," he muttered. I didn't flinch. "No," I replied. You liked being the hero, even when you were the villain." He stared, but I walked away before he could answer. Savannah joined me by the exit. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. He had lied to everyone. But we had finally told the truth to the world and to ourselves. The week after the verdict, Savannah spoke at the nonprofit event she had mentioned. I sat in the front row, uncertain of what she would say, but eager to hear her truth in her own words. As she stepped onto the stage, she looked calm, dressed simply, hair pulled back, not trying to impress, just to be heard. "For a long time, I believed I was chosen," she said. "But what I didn't realize was that I was being recruited, groomed, used." The room fell silent. No one stirred. "I thought I was his escape," she continued. "But really, I was just next in line." She paused, scanning the audience with steady eyes. "The hardest part wasn't leaving him," she said. "It was forgiving myself for staying as long as I did. For believing his version of my worth." My throat tightened. She wasn't just telling her story, she was telling mine too. And maybe Dana's. Maybe hundreds of others sitting in that room or watching the live stream. Savannah didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She stood tall. And as she ended her speech, the room rose to its feet, not just in applause, but in recognition. She hadn't just survived. She had risen. A month later, I received the court's final ruling in the mail. It was more than I expected. Not just restitution for the stolen money, but an official correction of the credit records tied to my name. The judge's language was clear. Noah had deliberately compromised my identity for personal gain. For the first time, I saw my dignity written into law. I hadn't just endured. I had been vindicated. I sat with the letter for a long time, running my fingers over the embossed seal, letting the truth of it settle into my bones. There was no joy in it, not in the way people expect. Justice doesn't undo the past. It doesn't heal the wound, but it closes it. It stops the bleeding. I folded the letter and placed it in a file labeled Freedom. Then I opened my window, letting the air move through the apartment like a blessing. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want pity. I had something better. I had the truth, and I had my name back. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. I moved to a smaller apartment across town, not out of necessity, but out of choice. It had big windows, a quiet kitchen, and walls that had never heard an argument. It didn't carry his shadow. It carried mine. I filled the space with books, warm lighting, fresh herbs by the window. Slowly, I let myself settle into routines that were entirely mine. I cooked for one without sadness. I played music in the mornings. I slept in the middle of the bed. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman returning to herself. People often talk about starting over as a blank slate. But that's not true. We don't erase. We evolve. We carry the lessons, the scars, the resilience. I no longer apologized for taking up space. I no longer second-guessed my instincts. I had been torn apart and then rebuilt, brick by brick, into someone I respected more than ever before. I wasn't who I used to be. I was someone stronger. Someone freer. And that kind of strength doesn't ask for attention. It just lives, quietly, fully, and without permission. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single card, handwritten. It said, "You don't know me. But I know what he did to you." I was almost next. I saw the truth just in time. There was no signature. Just a final line, "Thank you for speaking out." It saved me. I stared at the card, my heart tight in my chest. It didn't matter who she was. What mattered was that the truth rippled outward. It reached beyond me, beyond Savannah, beyond the courtroom. And it protected someone else. I placed the card on my desk, beside a small framed photo of my mother, her smile frozen in a better time. I remembered what she once said to me when I was younger: when someone shows you who they are, believe them. I hadn't then. But I did now. And maybe, just maybe, that belief had finally come full circle, not as regret, but as a gift to someone else. A stranger I might never meet, but whose life had been altered because I refused to stay silent. It's strange how life comes back to you, not all at once, but in pieces. A laugh at a movie. The feel of sun through a window. A late-night drive with the windows down and no destination. I reclaimed all of it. The things he tried to dim, I made brighter. The love he twisted into shame, I turned into wisdom. And the voice he once drowned out? I let it rise. I wrote again. I taught again. I forgave myself, not for trusting him, but for being so hard on the version of me who did. One morning, I stood on the balcony of my new place, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch into day. And I thought about the life he tried to erase. The woman he tried to silence. She didn't disappear. She transformed. Not because of him, but despite him. And that, perhaps, is the greatest revenge of all, not destruction, but quiet, unapologetic survival. A life lived with integrity. A soul restored. And a peace that no one, not even someone who once knew you best, can take away.